I wanna be the best in the game, invest in my name. Check no restraints, I'm obsessed with the pain. I ingest, I retain, assess and I change. Possessed by the thought I'll be free one day from society's restraints. Money, clout and fame, mud, disease, a plague. We all love to hate, have to play the game, have to make a name. All our insecurities are on display. This is war with the enemy, think that it was meant to be. Living in a time where disease is on every screen.
Hello and welcome to Season 1, Episode 4 of Tactical Awareness, a podcast about Infinity and 4 by Corvus Belli. I'm joined again today by my co-hosts Owen and Dan, and we're going to tackle another topic on the journey of getting into playing Infinity. We've done 3 episodes so far, focused on getting ready to play a game, examining your army, writing an army list, knowing how to use fire teams and read a mission. And we kind of ended the last episode with jumping in and playing a game. So in this episode, we're going to do something different. It's a little less lecture-y, a little less show note driven, and more anecdotal. It's going to be about the emotional journey of getting good at playing bad. Infinity is a game where you almost start over every time you change factions or play a new opponent, play a new table, play in a new store, play in a new event. And that can have some consequences. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and some of the strategies you can use to examine how you play and feel good about playing your games of Infinity. Oh man, our just to start us off, my favorite part about this episode so far is the fact that our recollections of all of these things are different. and from what side of the table you're on, it's going to be fantastic.
Oh, I know what's real. I refuse to accept it though.
Reality. What's the point of that?
Reality. I reject your reality and I superimpose my own. So hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Tactical Awareness. We're into episode 4 of season 1 of our show, talking about some hopefully evergreen topics on getting into and starting to play Infinity. In episodes 1 through 3, we started off with some common list building terminology and strategies. We dove into fire teams and understanding how they work and some general sort of advice on building them. And then we just finished an episode about missions and how to read and prepare for a mission in Infinity. And our goal with these obviously was to go through the process that each player goes through when they're first getting into Infinity and they play a game. And so temporally, those 3 things made sense to do in order. But this one's going to be a bit different. This episode there's not going to be show notes for this one, just to prepare you guys right now, because this one's going to be a little bit more anecdotal and emotional. This is season 1, episode 4, getting good at playing bad. So again, callback warning, we're going to refer to some roles and fire team and mission concepts in this episode that come from the seasons 1, episodes 1, 2, and 3. And if you find them confusing, check out those episodes before you go any further. And this is going to be an episode about how to basically push down the frustration that almost every single player feels when they play Infinity at some point. And Dan and Owen and I are going to share some experiences and ask each other some prompts. So what I've prepared for tonight is a discussion about after you've played that game. So you've gone through sort of episodes 1 through 3 and you've played that game and it didn't go well. You just played your game of Infinity. You're not sure what went wrong and you're frustrated with the experience. You are definitely not alone. And so tonight I want to go through and give some sort of like questions to everybody and talk about that, because what's useful when you play a game of Infinity is trying not to become irrational and buried in what's happening in the game. Infinity can be incredibly brutal. It can be very unforgiving when you make a decision. Things can go wrong. And there can be cases where you are just betrayed by the RNG. D20s can swing all over the place and can lead to some very statistically unlikely results. So if you come at this from other war games, especially war games with a much shallower spread of results on a dice, like a D6, it can be hard to adapt to the kind of gaming culture and emotional sort of like pace of Infinity. It's very different in that regard. And I'd argue that's kind of what makes it unique. It's kind of what I enjoy about it. Big plays and big risks can pay off. And likewise, when something crazy and unforeseen happens, it can lead to some really cinematic moments in the game. this can be very unpopular with some players. So if you're trying to get into Infinity for the first time, this can be a very big hurdle. And some people quit Infinity before they think they really ever give it a full sort of like shot, because maybe some of these things happen that we're going to talk about tonight, and they don't really rally from them, or they don't pick them apart and look at them in a way that's maybe constructive and useful. So before we go too much further on, let's talk about what's happened this week, get an update from the guys, and then we're going to jump into the first sort of like question about some things that can happen when things go wrong in Infinity. So let's catch up with Owen first. How was your week for Infinity, or just hobby in general?
That was all right. I played an in-person game on Saturday. Some combined army against Spiral Core. That was pretty fun. And I also tried out a tabletop simulator game with Dan, actually, having not played Infinity on Tabletop Simulator before. So that was interesting. That was interesting to try it out and see what it was like. But other than that, I collected up, what are they called? The Military Order Pan-Oceania Headquarters Pack. That comes with the Curator, the Grand Marshal, and Hawkwell.
Yeah, John Hawkwood, I think his name is, maybe.
Hawkman.
Yeah, Hawkman. He's basically like a super hospitaller. He's a hospitaller. Hawkins, yeah. He's a hospitaller button pusher.
Yeah. Unlike the other hospitallers who are not button pushers. But yeah, they picked that up because it looked pretty cool. And
they're great models, yeah. And you could proxy like the HVT model in there for almost any of the profiles. Even Joan could actually be probably proxied by it.
Yeah, you could use that commander one. And I mean, it has a profile too. So
yeah, it does, yeah. It's kind of like Artichoke Beyonce. It's got like a job.
Yeah. And is also an HVT, which is actually neat that a couple of the new HVT boxes are like that.
And I love that. Yeah, Pandora's that way. She's the HVT from Black Wind, and she's got that crazy cool Steel Phalanx profile where she's like a hacker doctor or hacker paramedic. It's a weird cool profile. I wish she was in like vanilla ALF, but she's not.
Yeah, but playing a few games, playing against Spiral Core, tried out the Avatar. Great fun. Avatar wins games. And then I played against Dan, and I played some Tartary Army Corps with my dogs.
All dogs go to heaven.
It was great. Yeah, Dan got to experience that.
Was it great, Dan? How was playing
so
against?
Great.
How many models are in that army? Because it's like one trooper in the first combat group is actually 4 models. You have 2 Anabode backs.
2 of them are that.
And also, you also have Straylocks, which means that you have max Straylocks as well. So you've got an additional 6.
I think it's 24 models.
8 models. Yeah, like 15 horse, and well, you got your Impetuouses too. But it's like just an absolute nightmare of camo markers and synced werewolves. We will put the army code in the show notes. How'd that go, Dan? Why don't you tell us about that TTS game, and we'll hear it from the other side.
Yeah, so that was the only game I played. Got a bunch of painting done, and I got some things on my Christmas list. So if there's a Boxing Day sale, I might use some extra Christmas cash to add some guys to the army. So I'm just waiting for that. But otherwise, yeah, that game was. I brought a list that was that Parvati list of like everything is an aria, or everything is like as structured. There's no dudes at all, just because I thought it would be funny thematically. And then I was like, I only have 10 models, and now I'm going against, what was it, 20s? I was like, what do I attack?
Kill 3 guys. All right, everybody's gotta kill 3 guys.
And then I was like, halfway through the game, I was explained to it beforehand, but it was kind of like, you don't comprehend. You're like, those are the controllers. These are peripherals. So I killed 6 models, and you lost no orders.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I got lost lieutenant, but I'm still losing.
Yeah, he was able to climbing plus his Zeta into a position to kill my lieutenant, and it made very little difference.
Yeah, the wolves still have 2 orders with their impetuous order and can just continue individually chain rifling people and throwing smoke and getting melee.
moving 7-6 doesn't hurt either for your packs on that mission. So that was pretty
train
swell.
total's pretty good. What mission were you playing?
What mission was it, Dan? There's 4 quadrants and 4 buttons. And then
it's either superiority or supremacy. It's one of those 2 variations, probably.
I think it was supremacy.
Yeah, so it's OG supremacy. Yeah.
Score every turn for the zone.
Yeah,
score every round, and then buttons at the end as tiebreakers. I think it was 8-1 at the end or something like that.
No, I got 2 buttons pushed.
Okay.
So I got 2 points.
Sick.
There you go.
It was first turn. I went and pushed 2 buttons.
That one's also obnoxious because it pushes so many points into the zone, and even the points aren't troopers, right? Like they don't generate orders, not generating orders, so they're just like they can score, but losing them is meaningless. It's
There was one point when like 7 guys were M2'd on the point because the Zetas just riot stopping in every direction.
Yeah, they were like, let's go kill the Zeta. I'm like,
I just failed every fizz roll, but then I'm like, I still got 90 points in the zone. It's fine.
Yeah, it's time to get sticky. He just couldn't kill him fast enough. He's just goo gunning everybody.
Oh, it was amazing. Or like Parvati.
Zeta.
Yeah, okay, so this is what happened. Zeta got, smoked, and then, close combat, good guy jumps into base to base with him. I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to be able to dodge away, and I'm not going to be able to do anything. But there's a guy with a Spitfire on the roof that can just shower stuff into him, and he'll probably die before I do.
Yeah, all your misses go on to the guys that you're fighting, so or go on to you, but all your hits go on the guys you're fighting.
So I was like, I'll be fine. And then I rolled piss poorly, and after 2 shots, both my Zeta and him go down. And my Zeta's my lieutenant. So I was like, okay, Parvati, go, super jump, go. It took entirely too many orders for her to get there, because my other dude bots were going to be even longer to get up there because he was on such a tall building and far away. But we got him back up and we killed some more guys, but it just wasn't enough. There was just too many dudes on the board.
Mm-hmm.
And then my O12 is not great at dodging with their regular dudes, and so a bunch of chain rifles just kind of wiped me off the board, and that was that.
Yeah, that is a agent of chaos list. Like and TAC is incredibly strong right now. Like they're a really strong faction, not with that build, but that build is like a list 2 nightmare where like you can take that all dogs go to heaven, and then you can take like a more traditional 15 order unknown ranger, hanging out with like Frontobniks and
even with sensor, having 20-ish camo markers like spread around your whole half of the board, because like 8
I had double sensor
mil, 825 mil and 440 mils are forward deploying, and then 6 more 40 mils are in your deployment. And so like you could just spread everywhere, and like everything has markers.
Jam the midfield. Yeah, no, it's if you're trying to take like a non-traditional approach to doing like any of those zone scoring missions where you're playing like frontline or superiority or supremacy. We talk about missions where you're trying to hold a zone of operations, so ones where quadrants of the table or strips of the table need to be held round by round or at the end of the game. Nobody floods like that. Like even back in the 8 Taga days, you couldn't flood like Ariadne and TAC can flood. You can just push in camo markers because like the Tagas can't. I mean, I guess they get intuitive attack their chain rifles into, or the chain colts into the antipodes, but then the antipodes just walk in and eat them too.
Even the sensor bots that are reliably going to discover everyone, 2 or 3 orders to get up there, and you better be able to discover in such a way that no one's going to see you, because like any one of those camo markers are all armed with something that could kill that discovery bot if he messes up.
Yeah. I mean, the horrifying thing is you can just throw a grenade. If you get within 16 of one of those wolves, he can just hum a grenade at Fizz 16, like
or yeet an axe at you, or a hammer, or whatever.
Yeah,
like
the trench hammer.
Ones can do that.
The ones with the trench hammers. Yeah, the Strelocks antipodes can throw trench hammers at you. So it's not like they're just templating to. You're right. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do that are very defensive, and like grenades are horrifying to link teams because it's basically like a teeny missile launcher that's, if you get too close, is Fizz 16 plus 3, so like Fizz 19. So even like if you're a TO guy coming to assassinate that guy, if you want to just throw a grenade point blank at him as he comes towards the corner, like an Oniwaban comes at him, just be like, I'm gonna CC you. Cool, I'm gonna throw a grenade at you. Like the grenade might actually be better in some ways. You can catch multiple models and stuff too. It's a neat trick.
I was really excited that I had like 2 sensor bots, and I was like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, I can like reveal all these camo markers. And I'm like, I revealed like 10 camo markers. I don't feel good about anything that's happening right now.
And it's funny because that game I think dovetails nicely into tonight's discussion, because I don't want to misrepresent. I don't want to say that I think, because I've played against Owen's All Dogs Gonna Have list a lot of times.
Not quite this one, because
But because this one's your, I've got any model I want all the time because it's on TTS. I
TTS
got it.
solves that.
TTS solves all the issues.
You
Mine's
were
the
always
models you
like
had.
6 or 7 camo markers behind. It was
Yeah,
almost there, but
it
not
was
quite.
almost there. And you've played against my version of that, but I don't have the Straylocks painted and I don't have the Antipodes painted. I have them, I just never bothered to paint them. So you haven't played against the whole like gamut of what can be run in that list. But so what I'm saying is, sorry, just a short story along it, but I don't think that game was unwinnable for Dan, but that list that Owen's taking is designed to create an emotional reaction, right? It's designed to do exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight, where some things just feel futile. Like spending the orders to discover and shoot an antipode doesn't gain you anything. Like it kills like 6 points out of a zone and doesn't even reduce an order. So
They're
that frustration, 5 points. Yeah.
They're only 5.
I was
He
feeling so good.
He kills 6 guys, and I'm like, 30 points.
Yeah. So if Dan's got like 30 to 36 orders over the course of the entire game, he just spent an entire order not even killing, like he killed, what is it? 1.5, 1 and 2/3, 1 and 2/3%. No, 1 and 2/3%, because 3 points is a percent of your forces, right? So 1 and 2/3% of Owen's force was killed with a great deal more of his order cap percentage, probably, because he probably didn't discover shoot it either. He probably walked over and then discovered it and then shot it. Yeah, sure, that's fair. Yeah, probably.
I censored. I walked up and censored.
So you didn't even kill him on that order. So at least 2 orders then to kill 5 points, right? Because you walked up, censored, then shot.
No, like I walked up and censored, but in such a way that I could hit the most I could while keeping out a line of sight.
Right.
And so I was just trying to kind of minefield, like, let's just reveal everybody.
Yeah, minefield everybody. Yeah.
And then we can go about attacking them. And then if they're not camoed and I'm kind of up there, then he's not going to spend the time to re-camo. And so then my total reaction bots and my guys up on rooftops can actually do stuff instead of just like trying to shoot at camo markers. And so that was my idea. And then I was just like, oh wait, you didn't lose any orders at all? You're still I got lost of lieutenant on you. I killed your lieutenant, and I feel like I'm still losing ground and not controlling zones. Cool. I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you're just kind of like grasping, because you're like, well, that plan didn't work. What do I do now? Yeah, killing these things that are killing me is getting me nowhere. How do I shift gears?
And then the dice went bad as I tried to shoot his guy, wolf or dog or whatever, off of my tag, and then I shot my tag down. And so instead of having 4 more orders with my tag running around the backfield trying to kill his controllers, I was trying to resurrect my tag so I wouldn't have lost a lieutenant on the next turn.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
It was a game. And that's the thing is, I want to preface, I think, our conversations later by talking about the fact that even though Dan is the newest to Infinity in this group, he is not new to wargaming, and what we're going to talk about today happens in almost every wargame to a greater or lesser extent. I think it's just incredibly pronounced in Infinity. So for me, for this week, I also had a very similar sort of game experience. I played a game against Jordan with my OSSS. He played as Tunguska and took a very, I would say, like classic Tunguska list. He had some great hitting pieces and a pair of Krizaborax. He had Merry Problems. He had a pair of Interventors, 1 killer, 1 normal, Heckler killer. Up front with some Cyber Mines. Had his Stempler, had his Cyclone to rain missiles, a couple of Transductors to put a net out. For all intents and purposes, I should have lost the hacking game. I had one Asura and I had a Probot Evo hacker. I was outgunned in that respect, and in my list, which was a 5-man Dakini link with a paramedic, a Dakini, sniper rifle, and HMG, backed up by a Probot and a Diva Spitfire MSV2. I had just a Mulebot. I had 2 Daleths, so I had double Daleth with the Climbing Plus marksmanship. Toolbox Botanist. And then I had Pravati with a Yud bot in group 2, hanging out with a Net Rod. That's where the Probot Evo was. And I had a Warcore for my last 3 points. So I didn't have like a lot of hitting pieces. I had this link, relatively inexpensive, sitting in my deployment. We're playing Superiority, which is the direct action version of Supremacy. So again, same as you guys were playing, 4 quadrants, 4 consoles. You're trying to hack each one for a total of 3. You can round score for 2, take you to 9. And then if your key ops is holding a zone dominant at the end of the game, you get an extra one for 10. And I won the roll off for turn, and I played risky because I knew if Jordan could set up his hacker net, I would have an absolute nightmare time advancing the Asura. Even if I put her in Cybermask, I would have nowhere to be able to really go if he could get his fast pandas out and his transductors out behind walls in the midfield, where I'd go to assassinate a hacker and then have to fight all the other hackers at the same time, right? And that's not like, even with my awesome whip and +2 damage mind bullets for Trinity, I'm not going to win against 4 hackers at the same time because they're also trying to oblivion me at the same time. I'd have to face all of them. I don't even have enough dice to do that. So I chose to go first. And I knew that I had like 2 jobs to do in the first turn. I need to push 2 of the consoles because then I could forget about it for the rest of the game. He'd null deployed for the most part, so I couldn't see anything. Now we're on rooftops. He had all the high ground his side. Stuck his hackers on rooftops where I couldn't see them. Everybody's prone. Creases were in the back, ready to like launch out afterwards and like push forward. He deployed pretty conservatively. So I was free to basically just go push the 2 buttons that were closest to me. And then I needed to kill his missile bot because I figured if I could kill his missile bot, get into the midfield, hold him off long enough that his hacker net couldn't push out, I wouldn't die from like arrow spotlights. So I sent my 2 Daleths on like an adventure. One climbed to the highest piece of ground in the middle so they could see where the missile bot was and gunned it down. The other one gunned down a couple of his sort of like hidey pieces, and then got in a fight with the hackler and got stuck and couldn't go anywhere after he censored him. And like just pushed him back into his zone. And we ended up not scoring for the first 2 turns, but he didn't have like a lot of options to rally without dealing with those Daleths first. The Asura smiley face and moved upfield just with lieutenant orders to like get its presence there, and then held off for like 2 turns. So I really gave him a bunch of like emotional damage in the first turn. It was pretty hard to come back from because his initial plan, right, of like put out hacker net, get missile bot, he just didn't have all of a sudden. He just couldn't do it. I'd fully killed the missile bot. He didn't have an engineer, didn't have a paramedic. I killed a bunch of his hitting pieces. And now he had to try and fulfill his same plan, but with less tools than he started with, like right from the beginning of the game. And I'll talk about it a bit more later, but he actually rallied really well. We both tied on zones for turns 1 and 2, so nobody scored. And it wasn't until turn 3 he managed to push 2 of the consoles as well. But I killed his key ops, and then I round scored on turn 3 by just like eliminating the rest of his army with my fire team. And it ended up being 5-2 at the end. It was really close. And he rallied super well, which I think is going to be a good story to talk about when we get to these questions and stuff, because he's in the old days, he and I would have games where that would have like, I think, challenged him. And he has really done a great job of like stepping back and asking himself a bunch of questions mid-game when things are like upside down all of a sudden, and then coming back with a plan of like, oh, I can just do this instead, and just changing gears. And I think that's going to be a useful anecdote to tell a little bit later on. So I'm going to save that one. So I was happy with my OSS. It's nice to get a newly painted army on the table and actually have them do okay, which was good. And it was a fun game. It was fun because it ended up being close. My plan went the way I wanted it to, but then I got stuck too and had to like get bogged down and lost my Asura in the end. I had to like stick it in Cybermask as long as I could. Somewhere it couldn't be found. Luckily, sensor doesn't work on smiley faces, so you can't reveal a impersonation marker with the sensor bot, and that saved me in the end.
When in doubt, go smiley face.
When in doubt, Cybermask, yeah. When in doubt, Cybermask, indeed. And then I discovered that marksmanship, Daikini snipers, and HMGs are real good. They're the answer to damn near anything. And if you have Parvati line with a Yud bot in like reserve, then they can get brought back too. They're actually they answer so many of the questions from the previous episode of like, can you win gunfights? Can you reliably come back? Can you afford to lose? OSSS feels like it's going to be like a one-trick pony, and I'm going to meet people that know how to take me apart, but they do the trick they do really well. The problem is that all the pieces are expensive, so it's hard to... It's not like my Nomads where I can have redundancy. There's not a lot of redundancy. When a piece falls down, your 70-point Asura is a big investment to go off on adventures and die. All right, so let's jump in then and talk a little bit about having a hard time playing Infinity. So I kind of already did the preamble, but just to go over it again, going through and playing your first few games when you're first getting into Infinity can be really challenging. And very often when you're done, you can have almost no idea what went wrong and be really frustrated with the game. So the goal for this conversation is to give some prompts, some questions to ask, and then some anecdotes and some strategies on how to get over that stuff. Or even just to recognize that those things happen in the game. That sometimes is enough, is if you look back in the game and go, oh, this happened, I need to not let this happen again. And you might find you have a better time in Infinity. So these are almost like bookmarks you can look for in your games to go, maybe this is why this went wrong. Again, every game's unique and every player's unique too. So it didn't feel right to do like a definitive, like textbook kind of lecture like we've done for the first 3 on this, because people can come up with different versions of this and everyone reacts to it differently. So I've written some, Dan wrote some in here too, but the goal here is put yourself after a game of Infinity that you did not enjoy. You not necessarily didn't enjoy it, but didn't go well, and you're frustrated and you don't feel good and you're not sure why. So we're gonna ask yourself some questions. The first one, and I think this is super common in every game of Infinity: did you get in a fight that took more than 3 or 4 orders to resolve? Anybody got a story they want to kick off for that one?
Oh, I've failed to push a button 7 times consecutively on whip 14.
Yeah, I mean, we've not got that one. I mean, a fight in particular.
I think that's on film.
I think both of us have done that on film. But I mean, a fight specifically, like when...
I mean, I had one recently.
Sure.
I had a Katakuri Harris team going up against a which one is the Toha Sapper?
The Nakul ambush unit.
The Nakul. So the Nakul on 1 burst against a Mark 12 Katakuri Link team took 10 orders to go down. And I died doing it. So like that sometimes happens.
So what was so incredibly vital? Like, can you think back and remember like why that piece had to die? Like, was it overwatching something? Was it preventing you from doing something?
It locked down my Link as the reserve kind of deployment without my Link having to crawl all over the place. And it also had perfect view over the armory that I needed to enter. And so in order to access the armory or get my Link moving, I needed to remove this piece. And for those of you who've played against Toha, it has 2 wounds because it has 2
symbiote
modes.
Yeah,
and it has a symbiomate. And so it has a lot of health built in. And then on top of that, I just couldn't hit it. I just couldn't roll the dice. And you lose the dice enough, or you win, but it doesn't matter because he's always in cover and he's got the first one he's total immune against and this and that. And because you're limited on orders and you're trying to push forward because you're like, I have to kill this guy and get to the next one because I have to reduce their order pool if I'm not going to get the room this turn because this model has taken like vastly more resources to remove than it should have. I need to remove more models, and so you have to play riskier, and then you now have to lose twice as hard if things go bad. And eventually I took it down. But it was one of those situations of the like, there isn't another tool. And then is that on me for not having brought another tool that could have solved this problem? Like Shinobu would have gone and killed this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Should I not just have Shinobu in every list in order to not have this situation arise again?
Right.
Where I'm not going to get in this gunfight where if my opponent has this quality of Overwatch available, I'm just going to always have a tool that can delete that as needed.
And also, like, at what point does the sunk cost fallacy kick in? You know what I mean? Like, at what number of orders do you like put the brakes on? You know what I mean? And go, hang on, is there another way I could do this? Could I coordinate some models? Could I get people moving while I'm fighting this guy, so at least something else is happening during the turn? Like, I find that's the that's the hard part for me when I get in those engagements, is when I look back at it and I'm on order 5, part of me is just like, this guy has to die. This guy, I can't let him live now. I've committed too much to this. You know what I mean? And I completely tunnel vision down onto that engagement. I lose track even of the tools I might have had. And then in hindsight, I'm like, I could have just coordinated 4 guys to shoot this guy, and he could have only shot back against one of them. And then, like all these other things I could have done to even just like get pieces moving while I'm doing the engagement. So I might still be spending 4 to 6 orders, but maybe other guys are still moving around and getting to where they need to be afterwards. Who are you trying to gunfight him with?
Katakuri Mark 12.
Oh, the Karakuri Mark 12, right?
Yeah. Oh, I outgunned him significantly, and it was a Harris. Like,
right.
It was completely, and he's at bad range. Like for a bunch of reasons, I should have won the fight much sooner than I did. And I did eventually do it. And the game came down to like his last 2 orders dodging into the room in order to win. Like it didn't mean that the game was a total wash, but you get in this situation, and it happened to me with Dan not too long ago, where just everything doesn't go your way at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And trying not to like, okay, re-rack, what can we do? What do we have left? What do we have left here? What do we have left there? That sort of mentality.
Mm-hmm. That happened in my game with Jordan, where he tried to discard my Asura, and he failed his Stemplers on in the first try. And so he couldn't, and that was the only piece really available to him to go and do that. So he couldn't all of a sudden get to this piece that was down to 1, but had no wounding cap left. It was just about dead. I'm just hiding in Cybermask basically at the end of a turn, trying desperately not to get killed so that I can send over Parvati next turn and bring it back to full health, right? And he's like, what else can I do to kill it? Who else can go discover it? Someone else has to go discover it. And then he's like, hang on, I have this other piece over here, the specialist, that could just go push this console right now with the 2 orders I have left. Why don't I just go do that? And so he just goes and does that instead. And that ended up being way more useful to evening up the score of the game than like fixating on trying to kill this Cybermask Asura, right? That he was afraid was going to do something the following turn. Right. Not that either of those is right or wrong, but one got him back on mission and ended up scoring a point. And killing the Asura, it would have taken her to the zone, taken 70 points to the zone, which is a huge deal. But I already owned the other zone with my Link team, right? So it wasn't like killing that zone or killing the Asura, that zone in particular, was going to deny me the 2 points for the end of the round.
Right.
So I think that's super common, is that people will sink a bunch of orders into something and then get into this like vortex of this is my plan A, and plan A has to work, and you almost overly commit to plan A. Do you ever have anything like that happen, Dan, so far in your games? Any experiences like that? Hello? Have we lost Dan? Is Dan still in the room? Oh my God, did I just miss that he's not there? No, he's there. I guess not.
He's just suffering some technical difficulties.
I think so. Yeah. All right. Fair enough. So it's on to the next question then, because Dan has disappeared. So the next one is, did you miss objective points that you could definitely have earned if you just spent your orders differently? And this is almost like a perfect follow-up to question 1, because that tunnel vision can result in that too, right? So I have a good example of that. Classifieds. I leave classifieds on the table all the time. Or I leave consoles and button push objectives on the table all the time. And I think I do it because I like get lost in trying to clear the field, as opposed to trying to like actually do the objective. So I'll focus on primaries over secondaries. And a good example of that is totally forgetting about like my key ops in a mission, when my key ops could have spent one order, its own tack aware order, and stepped over a line, like in, let's say, cryogenics, and all of a sudden have been scoring me the additional points per round for having a dominant key ops. And I just forget to do it. And then all of a sudden I've lost a point every round, starting on round 2, and maybe I forget again on round 3 or whatever.
Right.
Those are really common for me, where I will just run out of orders and have forgotten something super simple that would have scored me like a point to like net undermine. And that's why recently one of the things I've been trying to do is any objectives like that, any objectives where I go and push a button, I do them immediately. I do them while my order pool is fresh. I don't wait until I'm like depleted and I've lost a bunch of models to try and do it, because inevitably I stop being able to participate, and then those points are gone. I can't score them, especially if they're like round locked, or they're locked to like a specific model that needs to do them, and then they're just like finished. I'll lose an objective because like I'll lose my paramedic that needs to do it, or I'll lose my whatever the specific person that needs to do it is.
Right.
Or I'll get my key ops killed, or just not move them into a zone.
Yeah, I mean, those are all definitely ways that'll upset you. That's for sure.
That's true. I mean, after the game, right? And I think that vortex of like order spending, where you're too focused on one part of the mission, becomes like problematic for getting the score you want at the end of the game. Something I've seen you do, Owen, is sometimes you'll count your orders out. Remember, you get those magnetic order tokens, and you would like put piles next to people of like, hey, I've got this many resources this turn, I need to do this and this, and you would like parse them out before you actually started taking your turn. Do you still do that?
Less so now, because I could just do it like I do it in my head now. Like I used to need to put them all around, and sometimes I'll do things like I'll put an order aside, because there's some individual guy that needs to do a very specific thing, and like that's what I'll do, is like maybe I need to remember at the end of the turn to go into camo. And so an order just slides out of the pool and sits over a little bit to the side of the rest of the pool in order to stop it from, or stop me from getting caught up in trying to kill somebody.
Right.
Like it's more advantageous for me to allow this one guy to not succeed, like to be in the wind or to be left not killing, if it means that other guy gets back into camo, or this person, or like you have a command token sit aside, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because generally I find whenever I play a turn, I set like a single goal, and then how many ways are there to get that goal? So like playing Dan the other day, he has a Zeta. How do I kill the Zeta? And I also need to remove his discovery bots. Which one of these is a higher priority? Discovery bots are the easier one to do. So even if the other one's a high priority, I need to do this one first anyway. So let's see what tools I have. I got smoke, I have melee, I've got camo. Who's nearby? How many orders could I potentially, like, how likely is it that this is going to be done in 1 or 2 orders? Am I willing to die doing it? Like, can I just go in the open and risk my life? And yeah, that's kind of, and then when things go wrong, you end up in a situation like the other game I had with Dan, where your lieutenant ends up isolated on turn 1 and you lose every model in the first face-to-face roll.
Right.
And like, then it's okay, I think I've lost. Let's see what we can do to try and recover from this. And then I ended up winning because he then made a mistake on the other end.
And then you clawed it back. That
Yeah.
was Jordan in our game this week, where like he didn't get to win, but he stalled me for 2 turns that I should definitely have scored on, by just playing well and pushing me back and making it so I didn't have any comfortable moves, right, without losing pieces. I think
Yeah.
that was sort of like the key there, right? Is you can make it really uncomfortable to move around or make it high risk to move around. And then all of a sudden you're left not scoring a turn, and those round scoring ones, especially once the points are gone, they're gone, right? If you don't score on round 1 or score on round 2, you've locked yourself out of that full 10, and then you can start to feel bad about it. And I think that leads to like a really interesting question. Like, what about tilt? We've all tilted. I think everyone in Infinity at some point has tilted. And
I've never tilted.
He's back. Yay, he fixed his mic. We've been background trying to like type in the chat to Dan to see if we can get him to come back. You've never tilted once in your life?
Well, not in Infinity. It's
don't know
because
what
I've never played a game of Consequence.
That's fair enough. Yeah, that's right. There's been low stakes so far. And we should define what tilting means. Tilt is an old term that actually comes from playing pinball games. And a pinball game is the old arcade game where a spring would fire a ball up and it would go into rubber bumpers, and you would try and keep the ball bouncing in the air as much as you could. But people would actually like physically pick up and move the pinball machines to get the ball to go where they want it to go. And they had like a gimbal system in them with a sign that would say tilt, and it would automatically delete your score if it felt you tilting the machine. And the whole thing was, you can't tilt the machine because it's cheating. So when you're playing pinball, you got to play it fair and not tilt the machine. And so it's come kind of in like modern day language and like wargaming especially to mean when you go emotionally off the rails in a game. And I think a bunch of these like prompts that we're talking about with each other can get worsened by like immediately emotionally going off the rails and like committing to bad decisions because you are now emotionally invested in the results, or you've lost your objectivity. I've seen Owen tilt. He denies it.
Never.
He denies it to the death. He's never tilted, and then I've never won legitimately, and it's always been the dice or the rules.
Also true. My opponents have never beaten me because they're good at the game. They only ever win because the game is unfair and dice are rigged. If it wasn't for that, if I rolled perfectly, I would just win every time.
You just win every game. It's true.
And therefore, any loss is dice, not choice.
It's true.
That's how it works.
Franchise. You had no, it's all predetermined.
There was never a chance. I was always going to either win or lose purely on the dice's whim. There's no modifiers you can do, no unit comp choices, no order choices. You had no power. All it was if I had crit more, then I would have won instead of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Matthew McConaughey of Infinity. Yeah, so and it happens. And everyone, if you're listening out there, if you felt yourself get frustrated with Infinity, you are absolutely not alone. Absolutely every person that's ever played this game, unless they are some type of super like Zen monk,
people who just don't care about that,
or don't have an emotional center, have at some point been felt that tilt. They felt that emotional tilt because, like we said in the beginning, the game can be unforgiving, it can be brutal, and it can be very, very swingy at times, and the unexpected can happen, and it's hard to recover from it, because this is not a game of 2,000 Space Marines, right? This is not a game where you have a ton of redundancy, and redundancy means like an extra guy who can do the same job, not 50 more models in your army that need to die before your plan starts to go off the rails. So let's talk about tilt. Let's talk about things you can do when you are tilting. So
just context first is it's always like you can't really tilt unless you're competitive about the thing. And so if you're casual,
I think you can tilt, Dan, because the other guy's army isn't painted. I think you can tilt because somebody proxied a miniature and you forgot what it was or didn't really understand what it was. You can tilt for so many reasons, dude. I don't think it has to be that they're competitive. I hard disagree on that. I think everyone's triggers to tilting are completely unique.
All right. As you go along all these examples, I'm leaning more your way again.
Once again, I've bullied Dan into my way of thinking.
I'm
I think
tilted.
I think every I tilted you emotionally. I think that the emotional response is different for everybody. Like just to like pop psychology Owen for a second, having played hundreds of games of Infinity against Owen, the thing that tilts Owen the most is when a rule is either unintuitive or lends to a scenario that doesn't make sense in a given situation. So when the stakes are important, if there's a rule in particular that it is only like ever applicable in this one situation and doesn't make a ton of sense, that's the only time that Owen tilts about it. What was the one in N3? Remember there was like a camo thing, a 6th Sense camo thing.
Yeah, the chasseurs were the thing in
the chasseurs.
N3.
That's right. Yeah.
The mechanic, for those of you that don't understand, 6th Sense in the previous edition allowed you to declare your ARO after the active player has declared their second skill. What that meant was your opponent would move around the corner, and rather than you having to say what you're going to do, they would have to then say, and I'm going to shoot you with my shotgun. And you're like, oh, then I get to use my template, ha ha ha, or whatever you wanted, which is normally the active player's advantage. The issue with this particular model, though, is that as a camo state, the active player's AR or action choices are limited due to your state. So they can only discover, dodge, or move again. But what it meant was if this thing could see you, or rather you could see it or whatever, you had to declare move, discover, or dodge, and then it could shoot you, place down a token, do nothing, whatever. And you had no other choices. You just had to accept that you're going to get freely shot by a guy who had a boarding shotgun or some combination of something like that. And the only way to fight it would be to discover it. But if you do discover and he does shoot, oh, cool, you got the discover off, but now you're dead. And that interaction made it like, it didn't require any effort to make it happen. It just instantly happened. And it went against the spirit of the game of I act and you react. And we go that back and forth. And that was one of those ones that like, I remember my first interaction with it
at a tournament,
getting really frustrated that was how it worked.
Yeah.
And then having to try and figure out a way to overcome it. And the answer was multiple Magariba guards with multiple heavy flamethrowers. I'm like, I don't give a shit. Go ahead. I'm going to move. Reveal yourself.
It's almost
I'll
always
live.
the answer, to be fair. and again, to be clear too, this is not an issue in this edition of the game. So this is an older example case. And actually the new order declaration FAQ stuff is all meant to combat that kind of stuff too, right? Where you can declare your orders in any order you want. You can shoot at something you can't see in ARO, but the active player can't. Like all that required sort of like stuff now in the FAQ is to put a downforce on that, but you can see exactly why those FAQs needed to happen and those rules needed to change in N4 because they led exactly to that state where Owen, who's normally unflappable, has this interaction with a player who's leaning into it, and it's fully legal, but is leaning into it
right to do so. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
As annoyed as I may be, and it's the same as the current edition's dodge mechanics on active turn, you should take advantage, but that doesn't mean that I think it's an appropriate thing. And it's the things that when I encounter it and it's used to advantage, I'll become frustrated because it's like, is that what we're doing? Like, is that how this is going to be?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's my reaction. Like, that's how I feel about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it lends to like a, especially if you can see it coming or you feel like it's coming, or you weren't expecting it, or you have to learn it on the fly like you did back in N3 in that tournament.
Or the dodging in this event.
Like
the one event I've played in N4, every single player I played against used it in the same ways in order to end with link leads or link members in line of fire with multiple shotting explosive weapons, or in order to set up multiple guys to be able to have line of fire, or having high fizz template weapons able to see you that you can't react to until your turn. So now you're just stuck with this thing in your deployment that normally you'd have an opportunity to fight before it got to go there. But because this mechanic allows them to circumvent that, there isn't really a counterplay to it. You have to just accept that that's the way it is.
Yeah, it's like an unforeseen consequence of active turn dodging that the final position of the miniature actually isn't determined. So for those who don't entirely understand what Owen's talking about, active turn dodging means making a dodge as one of your 2 short skills when activating a model during your turn. And it's kind of the only time in Infinity that the final position of a miniature isn't known on its active turn until after dice are rolled. Like
And
on the
after
reactive
dice
turn
are
when you
rolled,
dodge, that's fine because the state of the initial confrontation is set, and then the dodge is the end of the order, right? And it kind of resets the stage for the next order. In this case, the active player gets to move again afterwards. And so they can put themselves into really advantageous positions or really
even if they
exposed
move
during
into
it,
line
yeah.
of fire as part of the dodge move to a model who otherwise had not been able to ARO, which in any other instance, if you move into line of sight from someone and are now capable of doing an ARO, you get to do an ARO. This does not, because it's at the end of the order, and therefore there's no opportunity to respond. And so like one that I'm thinking about leaning into is I'm going to start dodging my motorcycles who have dodge +2 and dodge +3 accordingly 5 inches with template shotguns. You have no you can't stop it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be beside you with a bunch of shotgun templates. And you can go, oh yeah, well, some other model will blah, blah, blah. But it's a thing that this otherwise couldn't have happened. Normally you'd have had an opportunity to fight me or get out of the way or blah, 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 hack me, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've lost that option purely because of the ability to now move during the active turn as part of a dodge.
Yeah,
because you always could dodge.
You end in line of fire.
Yeah,
and those people have no opportunity to ARO because the ARO window is closed because
right.
it's at the resolution of the order that you make that dodge move. So it's weird because once again it feels unintuitive to, like Owen said earlier, the active reactive.
What I view as the spirit of the game of
Yeah.
this act and react, and this goes against that normal rule.
Yeah, because in this case it's act, and your opponent doesn't get to react, and you get to kind of take your second action with no consequence.
Yeah. Now you can say, oh, well, if at the end of their first skill you get to react, and it's true. Like, yeah, but
if you can't see them,
but this is like
you can do it.
It feels like an odd change because you could always have done dodges before, but the active player just didn't move.
Mm-hmm.
And I never had an issue with that.
Well,
like
and
that,
simply
was a
by
fair way of doing things,
yeah.
right?
Simply by virtue of taking the role now, you can basically get your second short skill without generating ARO. Right.
Especially with like 6/2 movement
weird.
guys.
Yeah.
Like they can move with impunity on the second part of their skills. Yes, you have to roll a dice. So there is a failure state and they won't always get it. But it's one of those, like, normally a failure state means you die because someone else is trying to kill you when you do something.
Not that you lose 2 inches of movement.
Not that you just didn't move as far as you otherwise could have.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like that is the kind of, and like even in this conversation you'll surely pick up on it, that this is something that I find very frustrating in the current state of the game.
So now we know how to tilt Owen.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is like I'll get mad, but I won't be opposed to you doing it. It's just I'm not gonna like, there's no takebacks anymore. Like we're no longer going to play the kind of game that like, yeah, of course, sure, that's no big deal. Like we can err on, of course you would have done that. Yeah, pull it back. No. This isn't the game we're playing anymore. Like,
yeah, you've elected to play in a way that is
you want to play to the absolute advantage
of the rule. Yeah,
by all means. But what it means is no takebacks, no mulligans on your AROs. Oh wait, you have a shotgun? Sorry, can I use a different weapon? No, I declared what weapon I have. You can't change now. Sorry. Like, that's how you can be.
Yeah, it goes from the gentleman's game to the hooligan's game at that point. To use a famous a line made famous by the movie Invictus, right? Where I guess we could co-opt it for wargaming to say that 40K is a gentleman's game played by hooligans, and Infinity is a hooligan's game played by gentlemen. The gentleman can fall off sometimes when rules like that are.
Dan, you think he's going to make that quote every episode?
I am. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
It's more. I think it's at least
it becomes more true every day.
It gets extra truer. Look, man, if Matt Damon said it, it's quotable.
What about a hooligan playing a hooligan's game?
Matt Damon.
So do you have any stories about that, Dan? Is there a time so far in actually, you know what? Why don't you just tell us one in wargaming? Why don't you just give us one where the stakes right in wargaming in general, if you haven't encountered one in Infinity?
For me, it's kind of like those when the dice just kind of no. There's been a few times. I don't get tilted a lot because I don't get super competitive. And even when I'm trying to be competitive, I'm totally okay with losing. So I guess I'm not very competitive, but at the same time, I like winning. So I try to. But like sometimes when dice just go the wrong way, or like if I was at a tournament and I was like going super hard and like my like 2 games in 1 week, it was like I get 4 dice hitting on 15, and you get 1 dice hitting on 4. Oh, you rolled a 4. You crit me. I'm down. And all of a sudden my entire plan for that side of the board is nullified and I can't do anything instead of killing half of your models. Cool. And so it's like in that game that I was playing, I was like, oh, okay, that happens. Good to know. But if I was like in a competitive environment or like trying to actually do something or more invest in the game, I can see how instances like that in other games where it's like this shouldn't happen. Like there's such a low chance this happened. I got 3d6. I'm boosting with a War Machine. I'm spending my extra focus. I need to hit a 5. I don't 5 on 2d6. I got 2 chances. It should be fine. I'll spend the extra thing. I get 3 dice. I have 3 dice. I need to hit a 5. You roll 3 dice. You roll a 4. You're like, oh, that's okay. I have a backup. This is like statistically impossible. I'll roll 3d6 again with my other resource. I need just to hit a 5. Hit a 5 and everything's okay. I roll a 3. That's like 1 in 256 chance, and plus another. It's like, oh, well, what the heck am I supposed to do now? And all of a sudden, you're so fixated on that instance of horrible luck that you forget about all the other things you can do. And then you have to bring yourself out of that. And then, okay, what are the other things I can do during my turn? But you're in reality, your mind's just still focused on that 1 or 2 things that happened that just should not have happened and will not happen maybe for the rest of your gaming career like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of, and that's how I feel tilted, and that's how I have felt it.
Were you at that one tournament where I left for a half an hour in the middle of a match?
No, I don't recall.
Playing War Machine, and I had my Colossal trying to clear a single troll off a point, and he made 9 consecutive tough rolls. And so I just left the clock on my turn and went to Tim Hortons and got a coffee, and then like came back and then continued to play the game.
No explanation, just deadpan.
See, that's even worse.
Table. Yeah,
that's even worse dice tilting, because like when it's your dice, you're like, why do I roll so bad? But when it's the other person rolling armor, you're like, okay, well, you know, I'll hit you with this AP Spitfire, and you got like armor 1, or like you're like whatever, and it's like
I rolled a 20.
Yeah, I roll a 20. I roll a 20. I roll a 20. You're like, well, okay. It's just way worse when the other person's rolling the dice and you don't have any control of what you're rolling in actuality. But it feels like you do. You have some part of it. But when someone else is rolling and there's absolutely nothing to do with it, you're just like, oh.
Nah, that happened to me last night playing Jordan. I rolled into his Heckler with my Asura and Trinity'd it, and it missed me, and I hit it 3 times, and it was damage 16 against BTS 3, and he 2019 did saves on his BTS, and I was just like, oh, okay. And then continued to beat me for like 4 more orders, and I just stood there being like, what is happening? Like, what is this? And what should have been just like, well, and he was the heckler too, which I think almost made it worse, because I was like just imagining that he was just uploading memes and dick pics to her and just being like middle fingers, like LOL, JK, like
cope these.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Just basically embodying 4chan to her while she was trying to like implode his brain. And it was, and I had like it wasn't a mini tilt, but like I had to like go like, wait, I'm 5 orders in now. Like, I've gone too far. What else could I be doing right now with my life? And eventually he did die. But once I was 5 orders into killing one of the 3 hackers I'd planned on killing with those 5 orders, because she should have just rolled them all up. Although it is significantly harder to kill a interventor hacker with almost anyone, because they have firewall mods and they're BTS 9. So it was a good thing.
Also say I did end up winning that War Machine game because I came back and I'm like, oh, I could just trample. And a different model tramples
Yeah.
and then wins it. And it's like,
That's it. Clear your head. Yeah, exactly. Clear your head. Sometimes you got to go clear your head. And that's exactly what I did. Is I got my fire team moving, and my fire team basically set upon the middle of the table and climbed to a highest point and just started blowing everything away with marksmanship HMGs and multi-sniper rifles, which was the better plan. And so I just shifted gears.
So going back to last week, we talked about Owen and I playing a game, and he came in against my bronze and was like, I get 2 dice hitting on
28.
20. No, I had minus, maybe not.
No, you didn't do it the first time. I was
No,
like, I
that's
think I
right.
was 25. Yeah.
And I was like hitting on like 16s.
Yep.
And it was like, well, I get 1 die and he gets 2 dice. But if I hit him, it's like an EM attack. And so I could isolate you and it'd be bad news bears. And he's like, I gotta go do it. And then I rolled well. And then all of a sudden that was his lieutenant. And so all of a sudden he was like 2 orders in and he already had a loss of lieutenant to
Top of
prepare
one.
for on his next turn. He was like, oh shoot, that guy didn't die and I lost the lieutenant. Now I gotta play the rest of my turn. And I could see Owen, he didn't quite tilt, but I could see his desire to play out the rest of the game was very low. And it was like, but then it was my turn, and then my dice also betrayed me in a much worse way. And he was like, oh, okay, I can still win this. And he got all excited again. And I was like, oh, son of a
You
gun.
watch the emotional journey happen on Ellen. That's my favorite. My favorite is when you watch all of the stages of regret, remorse, acceptance, denial. Like when you watch it all, it passes through in like 5 minutes. It's amazing.
Yeah, it does. And so that was kind of like an interesting experience of like, if you tilt, then you just start making stupid decisions. So even if everything's staying the same, is my dice still betraying me? Then you're not in a position to actually take advantage of it because you just threw the game away in your mind.
That was one of those. That was one of those prompts. Or did you take or pick a fight that had really low odds of success? And I feel like that can come from tilting, right? Like you abandon hope or something like that, or you get like this like futility feeling in you, and then you just all of a sudden don't. You almost like stop mentally participating, and you start throwing your orders away a little bit because you're kind of having a tantrum. I've definitely done that. I've absolutely done that where I'm like, nah, well, I just need 5s. I'll just roll 5s. You can roll 5s. I'll roll 5s.
It's like you're straight up like gambling
I've
addicted
seen,
in a casino.
Yeah, exactly.
I've seen Ash tilt hard on dice. Specifically, one that stands out in my mind is Achilles Bigly Armor versus random grunt with flamethrower.
Yeah.
And Achilles rolls up and shoots him 3 times. And he gets hit all 3, and Achilles burns to death, and the grunt just walks away.
He made all of his saves. I was
11-point grunt
furious.
just takes all the shots and kills a 75-point lieutenant.
Furious. I failed every armor save. I was like, he's got 3 wounds. Even if he's got 3 wounds, he won't die. He'll be fine.
He's armor 6. It's damage 11 or whatever.
14. I was like, I just need to roll a 9. It'll be fine. I just couldn't roll a 9 3 times. And I was just about like, and it was just supposed to be like this no-brainer. Like, I have a Yud bot right there. I'll just patch him up if he gets hurt. It'll be fine. And yeah.
And then after that, his link team is exposed and I can cut through here. And then this random one little guy. And then not only that, he didn't die.
No.
To add insult to injury. So the next guy to follow up got burned as well.
Yeah. The emotional damage was strong that game.
Emotional damage.
Exactly. Yeah. I got emotionally damaged hard.
I apologize for my bad accent.
It's like open with the psychic attack.
Yeah, exactly. Just did all the psychic damage. I lost all of my sanity points basically in the first 3 orders of the game, and completely like dug into like long odds plays at that point. You almost feel like you need to make long odds plays to come back once you're back-footed, and you definitely don't. That's another trap, right? You start making risky plays because you feel like the only way to win is to now make like big payoff moves, and actually you're better off just picking bully fights still and grinding away and going for like the long game because there's still 2 turns to go. My personal tilt, I think that apart from like, just bad moments like that, like everybody I think can have those, is the social contract of the game. And I feel like Infinity relies on social contract more than almost any other war game I've ever played, because you need to have good communication with your opponent. you need to be able to put your finger anywhere on the table and say, hey, things that I know about, what can see here? What can see here? And you get those kind of canny, cagey players who are like, well, nothing you know about can see there. And they'll answer every question that way, just even if they don't have a hidden model, because they're just playing mind games with you. But you need to be able to actively ask and listen and ask and receive information, because the game doesn't work otherwise. Because before you declare an order, all of that stuff should be agreed upon. I should go, hey, so what can see this corner? Okay, cool. So now I'm going to spend my first order moving towards that. You make your move. I'm going to spend my second moving just to here so that I can't be seen. And when someone breaks that social contract and goes, oh, I forgot this guy's over here, I'm going to ARO at you. And you're like, no, you're not. I literally asked you that question. What could see this point? Oh, well, I forgot about this guy. Okay, cool. But then we've come too far. Like it was asked and answered. It's in the rule book that you need to be able to, it's open information. What can see a point? And you didn't tell me something could see that point.
And now we've acted, and you lost out on that ARO opportunity.
And you lost out on that ARO opportunity. And I'm stuck here now with you able to shoot me. And it feels disingenuous, and it feels dishonest, and it feels gross.
What happens then if you like stay in that spot and get into a firefight with someone else?
Nothing. That guy can just lie to you. That guy can just lie to you and say nothing can see that spot and have you walk into it, and now you're stuck there. And then the next order, you've revealed that guy can see that spot and he can shoot you all day. There's no proviso in the game for someone communicating badly. And I think that's so, and like, it's on the player, I guess, is the answer.
Okay.
If it was me, then I would just be like, that guy's just blind to that spot until you move again. Like, that's how I'd play it. If I missed it, my own personal social contract with Infinity would be to say, yep, I completely missed that. I did not tell you that when you asked me, I could see that spot. And so until that model moves again to a different spot, and if you back off, that you weren't visible either, I can't see you. Right? Like I would just play it that way, because I, as the player, have opted to make that a blind spot now. There's definitely players that won't do that. And there's definitely players who, wanting the thrill of winning or seeing an opportunity, will then capitalize on their own mistake. And that enrages me. In fact, I think there's only 2 or 3, it's not been an Infinity, but it's been in a similar situation. There's maybe 2 or 3 times in my life I've just walked away from a game table and shook hands, and it's after 2 situations that are like that, where a person has made a mistake or communicated poorly, and then is willing to like go to a ref or go to an organizer to claim they can now capitalize on their own mistake or bad communication.
I broke my own models mid-game over that before.
Do tell, Owen.
Playing War Machine again, in a tournament setting, fairly competitive. There is like a 60 or so person event, and there's a guy who is in Southern Ontario who is known for being a less than sportsmanship type person. But I was like, yeah, we always have pretty good games. Like, you just play really straight with them. Like you're not going to be getting any kind of takebacks. There's nothing like that. Everything has to be precise. No worries. I had a habit in War Machine of putting wings on all my models because I thought they were cool. And I had my Warcaster, and I'm like, hey, her wings, like if I touch the button here, like it doesn't quite fit. So she's right like a millimeter away from it. But she's base to base with it because I want to get the points. No worries. I end my turn, goes to him. And he goes, your Warcaster is not base to base with that objective. And I'm like, excuse me? He's like, do we have to get a judge? And I'm like, yeah, get the judge. And as he waves the judge over, I smash the wings off my model and put it base to base. And I'm like, I don't know what he's calling the judge about. I'm base to base.
Wow.
That sounds awful.
And then we had a judge sit at our table for the rest of the game as I slowly won, and he raged and then dropped his box of models on like the chair and then left the event.
Mm-hmm. He dropped every event I ever heard him play, and I think we're not going to drop any names tonight, but I know exactly who you're talking about. I think he was notorious for leaving after a second or third game. I don't think he ever actually completed a tournament, to my knowledge.
If there are losses, which they usually
were. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so actually, I thought of a time where I tilted hard.
Okay.
So I was playing War Machine in Southern Ontario, and and I was playing like minions, which are not the most competitive, or weren't the most competitive at the time. this was at the end of Mark II, where like all the crazy tier lists. I think, yeah. Anyways, and I remember I was like, okay. Oh, it is kind of like list chicken. So in War Machine, it's kind of like you get 2 lists, you get to look at the opponent's 2 lists, and then you get to blind pick your list that hopefully will counter their list, but also will be good for the scenario. And so I was looking, and list chicken is kind of like, okay, well, if I pick this list and he picks list A, there's a very, very, very low chance that I win. And if I pick list B, then at least I have a chance against both lists. It's not as good as if I point list A versus B, but it's at least it's not like considered almost an auto loss.
I feel like
And so
list
this
chickens
guy-
would be a good thing for Infinity. Just as a
Yes,
side note.
possibly,
Now we're talking about War Machine. Now this is a War
Arguably
Machine podcast. I feel like list chicken would be an interesting thing to bring into Infinity. That's worth a separate discussion. So anyway, go on.
the most competitive thing to do is never pick the if he picks this, I'm screwed list. But you know, I'm a gambler, and this guy seemed overconfident, and he considers himself a very good player, but also not the best to play against. And so he's like, okay, I got my list ready, and I'm like, cool. I picked this list, and his eyes lit up like, oh, he wasn't supposed to pick that list because that would be stupid. And now I'm in a bad position because his list is better against my list. And I was like, sweet, I got this. This is going to be a fun game. And he's like, drops a dice. He goes, and I'm like, so what list did you pick? And he's like, I didn't pick a list. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And it just was like this, like, stunned, like, what are you doing? Like, you gambled and you lost, obviously. And so I'm happy about that, but we still have to play this game because we're in a tournament setting and we're both like 3-0. And he was just like, and he's like, well, I'm like, so what list do you have? And he was still being awkward about it. It was like, it's so obvious. And I was like, and I kept asking, what list do you have? He's like, well, I didn't pick yet. I'm like, pick the list you actually picked. And he's like, well, I could play that. That would be kind of fun, right? And I'm like, just pick the list that you picked. And he's like, and he picks the other one that would destroy me. And I was like, okay. And then I was zero invested in that game. I was like, well, I don't know what to do against this kind of player. I debated just walking away, but I was like, no, I'll play the game out. And it went the way we thought it was going to be. And he was pulling shit throughout the game too, but I just didn't care enough to call him out on it because it wasn't going to make a huge difference.
Mhm.
And I was tilted. I didn't care about the game. Decisions were inconsequential.
He broke the social contract. He completely
Yeah.
broke the social contract from the very
And it
beginning
was-
of the game. Yeah, he was not honest, and you knew going into that game that you were not going to have an honest, fair, both people trying to play within the parameters of the social contract to see who can outthink the other person. He decided to go outside of it basically to win.
At the same time, though, if I wouldn't have gotten tilted and actually buckled down and see what I could have done, I could have actually tried to win that game, right?
Mhm.
And then I could have got like a positive out of the negative.
Mm-hmm. You
But
could have gone for
instead-
revenge. You could have chosen violence instead of choosing defeat.
I should have punched him in the face.
Yeah, I always choose
Always,
violence.
always
choose violence. Always choose
Always
violence.
choose violence.
Yeah.
You heard it here
Smash,
first,
smash
folks.
models and call judges. It's fine.
That's right. There's a reason why there's a high bar to become Owen's friend. Owen and I met after he smashed a model in front of me. Owen just told the story of how we met.
So basically, the point is it's keeping in control of what you can control and what you can't. And if someone breaks the social contract, you have no control over that. If your dice go bad, or if someone else dices go hot, you have no control over that. And so, like, keeping not tilted is about keeping a perspective of, controlling what you can and not worrying about what you
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I it's funny because if we pull this back to playing beginners, right, and getting into Infinity the first time or for the first time, it can be very important to find a like-minded group of people to play with, or people who at least play in a large enough group, and that sometimes sorts itself out. If you find a small group of players of an individual game, you tend to get more varied results of the type of gamer and the experience you're going to get, because they tend to be in more of a fishbowl. But if you can find a larger community, I think this is probably true of the guys you've bumped into in Calgary so far. It seems like there's at least like a good dozen people maybe playing. you tend to get a lot more of a balanced experience because they're forced to be more balanced with each other because there's a larger group of them, right? So that sort of social contract has strengthened by virtue of them playing more games more often with more different people, because you need to be able to go in and have a common expectation of some sort of generic concepts like how to treat corner case scenarios, or the understanding of the mission packs, or how the tables work in that store, you know what I mean, that gaming area, how the terrain works, what the commonly accepted, way of playing certain things that are the moving pieces in any tabletop war game that aren't necessarily just like covered in the rules specifically, right? Like how many pieces of trying to put down, who sets up the terrain, how that's going to work for the game night, what missions we're going to play tonight, stuff like that. Because you can't if you can spot someone who's breaking the social contract, the best way to get them out of your gaming group is just don't play them. You have choice in how you spend your free time. Don't spend it with people who aren't in it to have both sides enjoy the experience, because ultimately that's the goal, I think, especially in Infinity. It's a game that is unforgiving, but you're in it together. I've found that I've taught more people how to play Infinity by asking them what their options are during their turn and thinking out loud with them and experiencing the game together than by, and even theorizing what they could do and what I might do in response, than by silently staring at them, waiting for them to make their move in their own head, or trying to game to advantage the gotchas and the unknowns of the table. I have a much more enjoyable experience playing that way. And I think that participation comes from being in a larger group. You become better at Infinity by doing that, because everything's on the table. And then it comes down to making good informed decisions, and you won by virtue of your decisions, not by virtue of like the minute advantage of, I hope he doesn't ask me what can see this corner, right? Because that's always available to you. So if you do find yourself running into those people and you're getting frustrated with how they play, ask them tons of questions. And then when they don't give you the proper information, just don't back down. It's covered in the rule book. If they don't declare that, if they don't pick that thing to respond, well, then that's the way it is. And then explain to them what they're doing. Like, don't let them bully you around with, well, now I can just shoot you because you're in the open. Well, actually, you declared nothing can see that point. So technically right now, nothing can see that point. And in my next order, nothing can still see that point, because that's what you decided. And telling me now that something can is breaking the social contract. So in your active turn, you can move your guy and then he'll be able to see me, or I might move my guy and I'll be able to see him. But right now, nobody can see him because you opted to not have your ARO. And explain what you're doing right now is taking advantage of your poor playing. So realize how that's affecting the game right now. And don't let them kind of like slink away or feel like they're doing something that's okay. I find that puts a lot of downforce on, especially those particular negative play experiences happening more than once.
I think something to be said about that is also like, because I've been on the other side of it where I've watched opponents of mine spiral out of control, where like the dice betray them in an incredible way. Like it happens where you have those situations that are not player driven tilting that happens. Like it is the case that Achilles burns to death. And it's being the opponent that can like talk somebody through that shitty moment. Like if you're teaching the new guy how to play Infinity and you're like, I'm not going to bring a kill you list. Like I'm not going to spring a bunch of traps on you. I'm just going to play you and we're going to fight. And that'll be that.
Or like puzzles for you to try and learn through, as opposed to, you did that with Dan in the beginning. You took a variety of different things to present him with different types of encounters, as opposed to just taking like
what can happen is you can also just horrendously dice them during that. Like you're like, hey, yeah, this guy's on suppression and this is what this does. And he's like, okay, well, I've got my HMG. I'll shoot you. And it's like, that's a good call. And then he shoots you with your HMG and then you just crit him twice. And it's like, oh, well, that's how crits work. And you can see them get frustrated. And it's like, it's okay, though, because you have this guy and he can come up from behind. And then it's like, crit him too.
Yeah, the game betrays your whole teaching
and you're like,
yeah.
And then you see them start to tilt, and it becomes a like, okay, well, here's other options that could have happened that could have changed this outcome. Maybe instead of coming out and shooting me, you placed a mine there. Maybe instead of trying to face, you do a hacking program to get him to come out of suppression. Like you start going through here's opportunities that could come up that the next time you play
Right.
will prevent this sort of emotional moment from happening, because it can't happen because there's no back. You're not dying in the action.
Right.
And like
Yeah.
you don't always see it when you're the one who's running face first into it. And so like the other side of the coin, recognizing it. And like, I'm not saying, hey, instead of getting really frustrated and wasting all your orders trying to kill that guy, why don't you do this other optimal play? Maybe you don't want to go that far, but you can always remember it. And so the next game, so at the end of the game, when they're like, oh my God, if it didn't take me 10 orders to kill that sapper guy, it's like, well, wait a second.
Yeah.
Why didn't I just move the motorcycle at the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's on you to recognize that. And your opponent can be the kind of person that if you see that the other guy is like, he just crit me 15 times and there's just nothing I could do about it. It's like smoke grenades, man.
Yeah, smoke grenades are
He'll
thing,
never
dude.
smoke you again. Like make him shoot you on his active turn and waste time. And maybe he crits you every single time anyway, but at least you push the buttons.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, I very often will have my opponent hand me a list. Like if they get frustrated, I'll be like, well, let me see your list again. What did you have? Like what's some equipment you had? And then just like talk. I think we talked about that in episode 1. Some of our best like after game conversations are always like the going over each other's lists and being like, oh, did you think about this? Oh crap, that guy's a hack device plus. What about white noise? You know what I mean? And like going through and like playing the other side for a minute and be like, I was really worried if you would. And those are great teaching moments where you can go through and be like, I was terrified the whole game that you would do blah. And they go, really? And then that gives them some kind of agency the next time you guys play.
and it takes some of the edge off of what otherwise would be a very bad play experience where someone's like, I don't want to do this because I'm just going to lose, or he just rolls me into the ground. And it's like, I mean, yeah, sure, that happens. You're not wrong. I faced up Dan and I lost every face up roll, and then I won the game. And like I started feeling shitty, but it's like just because you're mad and you don't really want to play, you still play it out. You do all of the actions and you try and remember what the optimal plays are. And sometimes the dice don't betray you, and you don't remember those ones because they were good. You don't remember good things. You only remember the bad.
Everyone, no one posts
Like,
positive reviews on the internet. Those are all made by the
those
are made by the friends. Those are made by the friends and family of the people that own the business. Nobody actually posts positive.
All the positive reviews have bad English.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I only remember.
That's right.
I only remember Shinobu losing that 2 dice roll, and you vaguely remember the shotgun killing 5 guys with 1 order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like, maybe your opponent also ran into some bad times, or maybe you could have put your opponent in some bad positions. And so like that's the other side, in my opinion, that's worth talking about, or at least mentioning, is like,
definitely,
as much as you get tilted, everyone gets tilted, but you can also try and mitigate people being tilted, because it's in your interest to be able to continue to play games with people. Yeah. And so like, if you're the kind of person who's like, fuck this, I don't want to play, I'm out. Like, well, you're not the guy that people want to play with, because you won't get to play as much. And like the people who would otherwise want to play with you may not, purely because of that kind of attitude. And so like you should try and like or you can, and I'm not saying like, of course you're gonna go, you know what guys, I've had enough, I've just been dying all day, I don't want to do it again, I'll see you next week, let's re-rack and play again. Perfectly good attitude as well.
Like, walk away. And ask, like, honestly, ask for advice. Like, ask, well, what was the thing you were worried I was gonna do? Right? Like, what was the thing that you were sort of like thinking, oh, I hope he doesn't do this. Like, you don't have to ask for list advice. You don't have to ask for write my list. I think that doesn't work. There's a proponent of list writing. I think that there's ways of making very good optimal lists, but I don't think anyone can pilot them, right? Just like you can make a performance car, you can build a Bugatti or a McLaren, but you put grandma, or grandpa, like, who's half blind and is 1 foot in the grave behind the wheel, and they're not going to drive it the way a professional car, like a race car driver, is going to drive it. Like,
so I have a funny story about that, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
So in War Machine, because this is the competitive game that I came from, years ago now, but some friends were part of Team Canada. They're going to like the World Cup of War Machine, whatever it was called. And he's like, okay, you play Signar. Here's this guys, because everyone had to submit their lists like months before, and so they could all like look at people's lists and try to like, how do I play against it, or what do I do, or what list do I bring against this? And he's like, play this list against me. So I play it, and he crushes me. And he's like, all right, I'm feeling good, because I'm like, I don't know this list. I'm like, I'll just try to do this, and I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. And then because it was someone else's list, and then he goes and plays that list and gets absolutely destroyed because the guy plays it differently, and he just gets smacked out. He was feeling so confident, and he just gets mutilated. And I felt bad for him, but at the same time, I was like, that's not my fault. You asked me to play someone else's list, and how am I supposed to know what his plan was for all these models, or how to use these guys in unconventional ways? It's like, how am I supposed to just get that out of the list? And it's like, you can't. And so that's why list building doesn't work.
I think Infinity also, when it comes down to like lists and commonalities, I think it doesn't actually favor well-known builds, because the better people know a certain like build of thing, the better they know how to counteract it, the better they include tools. So like, it's like smoke visor shooting, or dogs, you know what I mean, or mine layers, or there's a like, or hacker nets, or missile bots, right? The more sort of like aware people are of certain strategies, the easier they see them coming. And I think there's a certain amount of like I would say incompatibility in particular with Infinity, with that mindset of like, here's a really powerful list. I think unconventional lists, like the all dogs go to heaven we just talked about, right? I think that having that, and because like that 2-list format for Infinity is so popular, I think having those unconventional lists is actually a really powerful tool. So I wouldn't be afraid to experiment. I think all great innovation in Infinity comes from people taking lists that aren't conventional and then using them really well by playing with them quite a bit and knowing how they work, and bucking the trends, because I think the trends are what sort of like, I don't know to say they make the game stale, but they certainly don't add to like the conversation. They don't add anything new. They don't add like a whole bunch of sort of like new tactics or dimensions to the way the game gets played. So even as a new player, I think it's not only is it good to try different lists and not be afraid to just play with your collection and play with what you have, I think it actually expands your skills. You tend to try out profiles and units you wouldn't use normally, or make the best of what you have. I'm actually not that I'm not a fan of the proxy culture in Infinity, but I think restricting yourself to like the models you have and learning how to get the best out of them and see what their weaknesses are and where they're not good actually makes you a better Infinity player. If you play with what you have to hand and you're limited in sort of like what you have available to you, you tend to get better at seeing the value of things. Whereas having like the perfect net list or the max AVA of something, it's great, but again, it's a skew. I'm not a big fan of like skewing into the most you can take or what the commonly accepted powerful thing is, because then it's just well known and you don't tend to catch people off guard or make them think 3-dimensionally.
I don't know. I think some skews are not well known, and those are the fun skews.
Definitely,
like, right? But it's like when it's a common skew.
Yeah,
like
but five tigers is a skew that everybody knows. You know what I mean? Like that's what I'm talking about. Is when something's good or it's too good for its points. Two repeater bots. It's 2 orders for 14 points. So yes, right. Like there's certain things where you just take the max AVA of them and you start your list there because it's good. It used to be Gazzies, right? Owen started with 20 points of Gazzies in every Hacky Slam list that he ever made because they were great. There was literally no reason not to take them. They disrupted everything about the game. And Dan, you're a lucky man for having never had to play Infinity when they were a thing.
So I have taken the missile bot exactly one time, in which I got completely I was all excited. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like spotlight a bunch of people and then like shoot no, I took it twice actually, and both times it was like I've played against a lot of missile bots, and this is how you completely deny the missile bot and shut it down. I'm like, oh, I'm not having fun with this missile bot. I don't know what to do. And then it happened again, and I was like, "No more missile bot. You're just going off into the the bin, and you'll stay there until I figure out this game more, and then maybe we'll try you out again." And so
I think
it's kinda,
the trick there is reactive spotlighting. You sleep on the missile bot and you let them spotlight themselves. You don't waste orders on it. Is you let them, you put out your hacking net instead, then let them come to you, and then you take advantage of the targets of opportunity. My experience with the missile bot is if you try and make it work during your active turn, it doesn't happen. You force them to bring them to you, and they bring their own targets to you, usually because they bring the hitting pieces into your hacking net.
so I tried to do that, and then they just assassinated my missile bot, and I didn't defend it well enough because
That's
of
okay, fair. Yeah.
and impersonation won, and jumping around and grenading and
Right. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
But I was like, I don't. Okay, well, if I, yeah. So, anyways, but it's just kind of like one of those things where missile bots are common enough and are good enough that everyone experienced playing is like, okay, I can deal with it. And I go, I'm gonna have fun. No, I got shut down. Oh, I shot exactly one missile with my missile bot, and then the guy dodged into close to my dead guy that was lying on the ground, bleeding out, and then I couldn't shoot it anymore because stupid rules don't allow me to kill my own players.
Well, a good rule of thumb with Infinity is don't make up your mind about something until you've played it at least like 5 times.
No, of course, I'll
right?
get
Like,
back to it. But
yeah, I think there's a real power in experiencing things more than once in Infinity, because it really does come down to things work an average amount of times, right? There's a lot of things that don't work once that may work the next 3 times and then never work again. It's that kind of game. It's swingy enough and it's all over the place enough, just in terms of like what you're playing for and who you're playing against and what their strengths are and what your strengths are. I don't tend to judge the individual components of an army list, and I think even when you're getting started, it's worth sticking with, like, don't change more than 1 model in your list, like 1 to 2 models to make it fit maybe between games. Like settle on a core chunk of your list and just play it until you're comfortable with it.
Ash, you're not my dad. I'm gonna do whatever I want.
I know. I'm just trying to say, like, it too much oscillation, I think, in Infinity when you're first starting off can make you feel lost, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's perfectly okay to pick a list that you're comfortable with because you know what it does. And the better you know what the pieces are, the more agency you feel like you have and the more franchise you feel like you have, the more you're going to avoid those tilts, the more you're going to avoid those NPEs, those negative play experiences. Because even if you're losing for your first 10 games, you at least feel like you made informed decisions and those decisions mattered to the outcome. I think the worst you can possibly feel in Infinity is like you didn't have any control over what happened in the game. And that happens a lot to lots of people, and it's totally common and it's totally okay, but it's also not fun and it can kick people out of the game, right? It can literally drive people away from the game. And there isn't like a right or wrong way to play Infinity when you're first starting off. And all of these things we talked about are completely common. I have another prompt. Did you feel like you didn't have the tools to complete the mission objectives? This was one you brought up, Dan. Do you have a story about that? Like where you went into a mission and your list just didn't have what you felt like it needed to get it done?
Yeah, so for one of those, sometimes, like, if you don't have any, like, multi-spectre visor and the other person brings a bunch of smoke, you kind of just have to sit there and take it real hard. And so I feel like I always need to bring some level of multi-spectre visor, whether it's even just a 1 or whatever, take advantage of it, because when you don't have it and they just walk all over you, it just feels like, oh, there's nothing I can do. I just have to sit here and take it. Because they can smoke and they have, like, or if I don't have any melee characters, right? Because I kept on saying, melee sucks in Infinity, and then I'm slowly learning that it does have its place. It's risky. It's always super risky unless you're like, but it's just like you can shut down models that.
I didn't say it sucked. I said that there's very niche cases for Infinity.
My interpretation of what you said to me was that it sucked, and I was like, I just will never bring melee models.
So the people
Accurate.
listening, the problem with melee and Infinity, it's funny because last episode actually Owen was coming up with a gimmick which we discovered does work. for trying to change this is that melee is one of the only times in Infinity that no matter almost how good your piece is, you're still just rolling one dice against one dice. And that's when Infinity is at its like most chaotic and swingy, right? With the 20-sided die, even if you're adding mods, and that's actually why most dedicated CC pieces have a stat above 20. Because it's designed to influence the swinginess of that dice by actually adding overall to your dice roll. You're trying to make that dice roll slightly more consistent, or at least raise the bottom, right? But it's when it's its most chaotic, and so Owen was looking for ways to get that extra burst into melee, with his little the slave drone, Caliban slave drone, to try and increase that. So it's I would say the word I would use, Dan, is risky. Melee is one of the riskiest situations you can put yourself in, and even your best melee piece can just get like knifed by a Fusilier. Like, it can literally just happen. Like, you walk in and roll that one, your faction logo shows up, and that's good in a gunfight, but bad in a melee fight. And then that Fusilier rolls something and just stabs your super melee, stabs Shinobu in the neck with a sharpened fork, and your 40-point CC piece just gets ganked by a 10-point line infantry, which is not the best. Did you feel like that maybe with your JSA? Because the JSA, we were talking about that after your first couple games with them, how they are very niche, right? They have some like niche kit and niche like fire teams and niche sort of like units. Was that something that you felt maybe a little bit, that their gimmick is sort of like very narrowly defined?
Yeah, I don't know. I found that like they have a really flat profile across the faction. Like all their heavy infantry is like BS 13, Arm 3, CC 22, Martial Arts 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
So like whether it's
they're Ninja Turtles,
or a Domaru or a Daiokai, or like pick your plate, like, and you can bring interesting like combinations of them, and like there are definitely like cool combos that you could do. They feel very like there's this way and then that way, but at the same time they also have like the ability to bring wild skews, things like ninjas and Oniwabans and motorcycles, and things that are like most games you play, you're going to play against 15, 25 millimeter bases. Sometimes one of those bases will be 40 mil, and even rarer, one of them will be a 55 mil. And then you can show up with like 5 55 mils and like a wave of all kinds of weird stuff with different dish rules, or the ability to deploy in strange ways and stuff like that. But like, yeah, it has felt very much like if there's a faction that I remember when they first came into being as a standalone faction, and they were the ones that first started to bring in the mixed link teams, and the ability
I was playing them back in 2018
to like Core and Harris, and I see them now as like they're the prototype for what all of the other factions have become now. Because like the things that I'm seeing as I'm playing and watching the other factions I play against, with the exception of Toho, because they play their own version of this, it is that now everywhere. It is like to the degree that they've made now rules for mixed and pure link teams. I know it's not called pure, but I'm calling it anyway.
Composition bonus link teams.
So like they've gone so far in the direction that the JSA kind of spearheaded, that now other factions just do that, but they do it +1.
Oh, they do it from a hyperpower faction where there's just more profile availability, where there's just more units in the mix and stuff.
So it's like, you can bring a really dynamic group of guys in JSA, and you can play the game that everyone's playing right now. You got to work a little bit more for it. And you also have some like weird profiles that kind of, if you want to play that way, don't really have a place. Unless you like really make them have a place, or you lean into it, in which case you're off doing your own little thing, which I think they're really fun for in that regard. Like I love the motorcycles. I really do. I like that you can dismount and still be mimetism. So you have these little armor 2 4/4 mimetism now having cover hackers or Spitfires or whatever running around. And so like I really enjoy that, but they definitely come off as like, hey, we were the first try at this, and now we've refined it.
Yeah, it can be hard, I think, to play the mission objectives too with your JSA, because certain things like decapitation, or anytime you have an open lieutenant and they can't turn into a profile, it literally just like removes Shinobu, right? So if you like playing Shinobu, or you go to game night and the mission for the night's this, you go to an event and this is in the mission pack, you didn't really think about that. All of a sudden, Shinobu just can't hit and deploy, and she's always on the table. She can't go into a marker state, like or a key op.
Her as your
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, but if you're having a bad time and you feel like you can't do the mission objectives because of that, like your list may be very hampered for lieutenant options. You know what I mean? Or hampered for, like, I found I had a hard time picking a key op last night because they can't be a rem and they can't be a regular. And like half of my army's rems, and they can never go into a marker state. So the Asura can't do it because I can't cyber mask all of a sudden. Right, my Naga can be one. I guess my Shukar can be one, and then the rest of my armies are remote. Parvati could be one, but then everyone else is a remote, and it's like, I've got I have 3 models that can be key ops now all of a sudden, and half of them want to be off doing stuff for gunfighting, and I just want you to sleep on a building for the whole game. So like if it could have been a regular, my war core would have just been it and would have like towed into one of the zones and then just slept on his face for the entire game. So I feel like the completing the mission objectives question is, if you feel like you couldn't do it, sometimes it's because maybe you've taken a list or you've gotten comfortable with something that is incompatible with what you're trying to play, right? And it can be very, like, again, with that net list thing too, that idea of like, here's the best list, that can often get pushed back against by the sort of dynamism of Missions in Infinity, right? Where all of a sudden you have to pick a living, not rem, not irregular model to be this special person in a mission. If that mission's in the mission pack, and that's really important. And so you have this thing where you're like, oh, maybe I should try a different lieutenant, or maybe I should have my list too, have a different lieutenant in it for exactly this reason. And I think those questions are useful to ask yourself, because you can find the previous question, you left points on the table because you didn't have a good model to fulfill X or Y role, or even your faction might have limited availability of choices for you to take models that are good in that role, right? My Asura does not care about being the decapitation target. She might die anyway, but and everyone knows she's a lieutenant after she spends her 2 lieutenant hours walking around exploding people's brains. But some people don't want to be revealed and be on the table and have a lieutenant replaced next to them, because you're gonna know exactly which of those camo markers are Shinobu all of a sudden, and she can't hit and deploy. So I think it's gonna be a mix even of what you and Dan said, where Dan's like, I ran into armies I hadn't played against before and felt like I did not have the equipment to deal with them because they were throwing grenades in every direction. And we were playing a spaceman game all of a sudden that was full of werewolves. Or like
so many werewolves.
Murder aliens. Yeah, so many werewolves and murder aliens. I don't know what's going on here. And it can also be your faction might be very like drilled down. Like I'd say all the N2A factions probably struggle with this, because they're like special character soup with like a mixture of Code 1 box shenanigans mixed in. If you just took like a bunch of special characters and mercenaries and mixed them with like the 2 factions in every Code 1 box, you basically have the N2A factions. Like White Banner's just Operation Kaldstrom plus mercenaries. So you got like the Kane Solutions Ninja, you got some of the Outrage characters, like now I think you have maybe Drew's in it too. I can't remember. Maybe Emily Handelman's in it. And you're kind of like, oh, everyone's a character. I don't have a lot of great lieutenant options because it's like all of these mercenary characters, like John Hawkwood is one of my like my mercenary characters I can take, and you don't have a lot of choices. And I feel like JSA kind of fits in that camp too, where because you're so sort of like well defined as a faction of like, these are the profiles and these are what we have, you can often find yourself having not no tools to like complete a mission objective, but very often not the tool you wish you had were you playing another faction, or they might feel suboptimal compared to other factions' tools.
Or maybe it's just that Kaisetsu have worse stats than War Cores.
They do. Kaisetsu are
for 3 times the points.
They're supposed to be like working at Lopan's Noodle Hut during the day and fighting for the freedom of the Japanese succession during the night, man. They're just regular Joes. This is the secessionist army. They're not. It's like it's the background for some of the units in Infinity they don't necessarily visually match up with. Like I didn't realize that intruders are supposed to be like they're labor advocates. So when people try and like break up the unions on the nomad ships, these guys go in with like a duffel bag full of guns and then put on their like Joker mask and assassinate the nomad official who's trying to like break a deal with the unions. Like there's like a bunch of like background for some of the nomad characters where I was like, this is crazy. Like the Mobile Brigada are supposed to be wearing like patchwork armor. Like it's all Junkacon like cobbled together. Like it shouldn't be uniform in any way. Stuff like that. Like it was funny reading the RPG books and the background for all of these unit types and being like, oh, this doesn't really look like how it's described here. Like I want that guy in the Joker mask with the with the assault rifle, the intruder breaking in and undercover to go kill a whole bunch of like anti-labor advocates or whatever it is. So you had a couple in here, Dan, that you added in, and we'll finish through them and then wrap it up. So the first one you had is you do not have a backup plan, or you relied on one or two rolls. Tell me what you mean by that.
So that's kind of like I have my tag that I bring. That's a bill on a point, and then he does his thing, but then someone with a high CC comes in and engages him, and I'm like, well, what do I do? It's kind of like, and then it's like, well, if I brought a CC guy, then I can like coordinate order the CC guy in, and I can get multiple dice against that guy, and then have a pretty good chance of getting him off the tag so the tag can go do thing. Just because my tag isn't good at melee, not nearly as good as, someone else that has a higher than 20 kind of CC in martial art. Or maybe I brought some elite guys, but I didn't bring an engineer or a medic to bring them back up. So when they go down, there's no backup plan. It's, the dice didn't go my way. My list kind of fell apart. It's things like that of like, when I'm playing, did I have some kind of redundancy so I could play around when shit hits the fan? And I find that a lot of the time I don't. And when things go horribly wrong, which they always do, I don't have any. Late game, I just have a bunch of crappers in the back, and they just all get slaughtered by templates, and I lose the game. It's like, so I fall off hard, is what I'm trying to say. As the game goes on, turn 3 is rough for me typically.
Right. It's funny how that late game you don't quite have the orders to do all the things you want to do. That's where my like cycle of like breaking down the game usually starts. That's where I start like analyzing turns 1 and 2 and being like, why am I in this situation? Why do I only have one? Like if I need to walk all the way over here and push this console to win the game, can I get there in the orders I have? And then I'm doing it in my final short scale of the game. Like, why am I in this place?
Yeah,
I can think of like 100 games on I've played where it's like, well, and we're like literally like eyeballing it in like 8-inch segments, being like, see, the console's there, I'm here. It's gonna be about 4 orders to get there. I'm gonna have one. This is it. This is no one can see me. All right, here we go. And then it's just literally lone somebody paramedic gets up from out of the deployment center. He's been for the entire game watching for a Van Zant that never arrived and has to haul his carcass across the board because he's the only specialist left to make like a dice roll. And then it all comes down to that final dice roll. And there is something fun about that. But then if it doesn't work, you're just like instantly like, I wasted an hour doing this. I could have coordinated this order and moved this guy up already. Like, what am I doing? And you're like, you're already Monday morning quarterbacking it in the back of your head. And
for me, it's more of like, I don't even have that guy, that specialist that's alive at the end, or I don't have that awful Hail Mary. I don't even have that. It's just
right.
I didn't bring enough.
You didn't have that backup plan. Yeah. And so you're stuck on that.
Yeah, I didn't bring a specialist. I clumped up too much in this corner. I didn't have, I covered defense really, really well on this side, but I ignored defense on that side because that was my super offensive team. And then they attacked that side, obviously. And then I was like, how do I get out of this? All my mines and all my other stuff are over here, and my templates are over here. And so I can't get it out. So it's like, oh, shoot. And it's just kind of like it. So I had a really bad time of like, oh, yeah, this guy's going to do awesome. And then he just does absolutely nothing for the rest of the game. And half my list is in this Harris or core that's just like, just gets shut down by one CC monster that jumps in to me. And I'm like, I can't. It takes me like the full 3 turns to get rid of them. And it's like, I
Right.
got rid of them, but now half my list didn't do anything, and half my orders were spent just dicking around instead of having the proper defense. And so it's kind of like I didn't have a proper. There weren't contingencies, and part of it is just like knowing what's available to come attack you.
I mean,
Like,
it's hard enough. It's hard enough when you start playing Infinity, Dan, to have a plan A, right?
Yeah,
And you're now just realizing that like only having a plan A is in it itself a weakness, and you need to have a plan B usually for almost everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's an incredible point. That's a really important point, that like when plan A doesn't work out, you need to have a plan B. Even if it's not a good plan, at least it has to be there, because that feeling of futility after you've lost plan A and there's no other way to complete the objective sucks. And that can lead to those really strong emotional tilts, or those like feelings of futility, or just like wanting to throw up your hands and quit and being like, there's no road to victory now. I'm all done. And
right.
so
or like my one Harris comes up, my one guy with the multi-spectre visor and the heavy machine gun comes up. He crits on a 3, I get shot down, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, let's move it to the other side of the board. But meanwhile, my Harris was moving through my other defensive stuff, and so now 6 models are all clumped up, doing nothing. And then I was like, well, I need to spread out and create a defensive net instead of, I'm sad about that, let's try to be offensive over here and spend all my orders. And then all of a sudden it's their turn. They're like, I'm going to run forward and shotgun you, go boom, boom, bam, and all of a sudden 6 of my models get hit at one time. And I'm like, I could have prevented that. It's kind of like you don't realize that all because things went horrible doesn't mean you still have to set up a defense.
Yeah, and it feels almost like an emotional setback too, when you feel like you've just gotten like that first like level of competency, and then you have like that like, I didn't bring a backup plan, I still suck at this. Like you almost feel like you've let yourself down. I've definitely been through that, where I've like kind of unlocked like the first level knowledge of like a new faction that I'm playing with, but I haven't seen all the angles yet, and then I miss something, and I go to the next game and like, I wish I'd taken this instead. Oh god, I have instant regret. Like I'm at deployment looking at all the things I should have taken, thinking like, oh man, Ash, you idiot. I go through all those stages of like remorse, basically.
I feel like there's like greedy list building where like, if I don't encounter that, then I don't need this guy. And I can bring this guy who's cool and I can do things with. And then you play, you're like, I should have brought the other guy.
Yeah, that guy slept on a building the whole game, and you're like, oh man, I wish I'd had this other guy. I wish this 70-point guy was 2 30-point guys is usually where my brain goes to.
Yeah.
So what's the other one? The last one is, did you forget to set up a defense? Or
yeah,
did you?
I kind of talked about that.
Can I rephrase that? Okay,
Sure.
I see you just. I would like to rephrase that too. Did I have a plan for going first and a plan for going second? Because I feel like that's the question I ask myself in regards to the defense thing. Is that dice roll? If you have a plan for what you're going to do if you go first, but you don't have a plan for what you're going to do if you go second, you lose that dice roll and your opponent chooses to go first, you can feel back-footed right from the very beginning of the game.
Oh yeah.
And I have definitely experienced times where I spend so long like pining for like, and not even like reassessing my deployment. I'm like, well, this is where I'm going to deploy because this is where I want to be for when I get my first active turn, and not actually take the time to go, hang on, I'm going second. I'm never getting a first turn now. Like the best, most positive state in Infinity is my opponent like goes and removes a bunch of my orders and now has the power position because he's basically gotten to remove the pieces first. He has the order advantage. I no longer have all my components and all my tools. So I have to accept that's going to happen. And I need to completely change my outlook on the game to try and minimize how much of that's about to happen over the course of this first turn. Whenever I make that mistake of being like, I'll just do my first turn layout and hope for the best, it almost never works out for me. I almost instantly regret it, and something bad happens, and I've either stood up in the wrong place or gone prone in the wrong place. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, what if you have a really powerful first turn list and you just have not yet lost the roll and have gotten to go first every time?
It's gonna be a rude awakening.
To the point where you continue to win the rolls, and the person on the table over says, "Why don't you go second and see what you'll do?" And you go, "No, I want to win."
I think you're due a tilt. I think that's all I can say is you're due a tilt. because it's gonna happen. It's gonna come around that you don't get to go
We'll
first.
never know what that'll look like.
And then, and then every day is a sunny day for Owen, and he's
Yeah.
never lost. And it's always been the dice or the fact that he didn't get to go first.
I was the guy saying, "Why don't you just go second and see what happens?" And he's like, "No."
I don't want to do that, Dan, because this list doesn't go second. This
Yeah.
list just shits werewolves all over you until
No,
you
it's
Oh, that
that
was a
This is a
margarita
double
guard.
Margarita guards.
no, even better. Okay, this list just walks two giant unstoppable
Mine.
tanks, and mine's
Mine.
the entire table.
Mine.
I wasn't even playing against him. I was like standing beside him about to play another game, and I'm like, "You just went first. This will be the third time in a row, and you
Mhm.
crushed them to the point where it wasn't even a game back. Why don't you go second and see what happens?" No, and he just crushed the third guy.
I told Jordan that story. Actually, I told Jordan the story about how Owen's come to Calgary like an agent of chaos and has decided that he's just gonna just whiplash everybody. So every week they come ready for a Maggie list. He brings the JSA, and then the week after that they bring the Maggie list. Then he brings the Shazvasti, and no one knows what to expect.
Then
And
the
he never-
avatar shows up.
Yeah,
and
so
it's
the
like,
avatar shows up. I refuse to be defined by any given play style, but I will skew. I will always skew.
So with going back to the defense thing, yeah, second turn definitely, because you're all defense right from the get go when your opponent's at their strongest, because they can figure out everything they want and they know they're going to go first, and so they can deploy accordingly. And so like, yeah, that's super important. But I think it goes further than that, where it's like, say I got to go first and I get to go in, but they set up a good defense and I wasn't as effective as I maybe wanted to be. Then when do I call it quit and backpedal a little bit so then they have an equally hard time against me, instead of
Yes.
just doing enough damage, as much damage as I can, and then getting ripped apart on the back foot because I hit their wall and then I didn't put up a wall myself, and then they get to walk through me.
That is my most common new Infinity player advice is divide your order pool in half at the start of every turn. Spend the first half trying to figure out what you need to want to get done this turn, and then spend the second half preparing for me, right? Being where you want to be when I take my active turn. And you don't have to spend them equally, but if you divide in half at the beginning and start to think about that stuff when you're first going, you don't blow through 8 orders and then have 2 orders left to try and reposition your entire army to somewhere that isn't completely in the wind. You know what I mean? Standing in the open or standing over the last dead body they just killed or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think that's super important.
It's happened twice against Owen now, where I've killed his lieutenant on turn 1, and then he's absolutely crushed me. Because it was like, to kill his lieutenant, I had to overreach a little bit. And then with command points, you can make irregular orders regular orders, and just a few of them to get that one key model in the right place, because I didn't spend enough orders to develop the board and my guys are too clumsy. Then I get wiped and I lose way too many orders and way too many guys because I was trying to be too offensive.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I've learned that lesson yet, because
I appreciate that your point of reference is the veteran war machine players try and go for the caster kill at the beginning of every game.
I don't even realize I'm doing
Just
it, but I'm
to
like,
instinctively immediately try and kill the lieutenant.
I mean, it seems good to put him in lost of lieutenant turn 2, right?
Top of 1.
Yes, top of 1.
Yeah. Well, it's going into turn 2. They have lost of lieutenant, right?
No.
Yeah, so
Oh yeah, sorry, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Because
Because
the other one, you top of 1 loss of its enemy in the all
Oh,
dice
that
go
is
to
true.
heaven.
That is true.
You went first and
turn
killed
1.
my lieutenant.
You killed
and I had not
Verona.
had
You
a
killed
turn.
Verona on top of 1.
Yeah.
And then and then I died a horrible death because I was focused on killing, I guess, inefficient things, and now I know, right? Instead of just, maybe I just go kill that lieutenant and then run back and don't try to kill the other things as much, right?
Well, I mean,
Then
I can give feedback, like, and this is the idea of like, how do you try and like offset that tilt? Feedback I have for that game is, you don't know my list, but the reality is it's unlikely I'm going to try and react to that sensor bot, even if you ran right into the middle of those camo markers. Maybe one of them's going to reveal itself, but you can afford to lose that robot to reveal like 7 or 8 camos, because then the Zeta can just kill them all. And even if he can't kill them all, he can put himself in a position that he's suppressing for when they start coming out, that he's just going to shoot them all to death.
right. So I should have been way more aggressive with the sensor bots and be like, okay, go ahead and shoot me, because if you shoot me, you're dead.
Yeah, and
you're
much less
revealed.
aggressive. And then even if I shoot you, you just go, I'm censoring anyway. I'll take the bullet. I'll pass my sensor check. And then the Zeta comes up quietly from behind and suppresses, and the TR bot goes the other way. And all of a sudden, like, yeah, it's true. You lost orders and didn't really kill any of my stuff. But now my turn begins, and I'm like, uh-oh. Like, this guy stands up and does an unopposed smoke grenade to cover that guy over there and dies. And now I have a smoke grenade. Okay, I can move a few steps. And, like, I have to really fight to get even a few inches forward, kind of thing.
It's funny because Owen's even explaining one of those whole, like, you're doing the active thing of censoring the robots, and then the reactive thing of setting up the Zeta in such a place where now these guys are all revealed. If they come around the corner, they're also going to get blown away by X or Y, right? Like, it's that mindset of sometimes I don't have to kill during my turn, but I need to do stuff, and then I need to be ready for when he's doing stuff.
And it's kind of like, I think it could be summarized in how big of a problem can you throw on your opponent's lap?
Yeah.
Right. And so,
how big is the puzzle?
If you're going second, and okay, you got to set up your defense. But then during your turn, like throwing a CC monster into base contact with my Zeta, I'm like, how do I get rid of that? And if you position him on the side of the Zeta where I can't get a good angle to shoot at him or whatever, if he's on like a high building, then I'm like, okay, well, now that's if I try to hit him with my Zeta, I might die. But you don't even have to kill the Zeta. You just sit there. And that's what Owen's done to me multiple times. Where I'm like, dang it. I'm like, I'm activating Zeta to try to hit you. Oh, I lost 2 of my hit points. I'm no longer going to activate that Zeta.
I'm going to shoot into my own Zeta to try and get these things off me.
I'm killing myself using my own orders. You're killing my Zeta for free using my orders. That's no fun. But then all of a sudden I've lost like a 70, 80 point, or maybe even higher if it's another tag. And so it's kind of like being in that spot where if I bring a Zeta, maybe I bring a CC monster of my own. And so then if he runs into me, he has to spend orders to kill me or try to, which is always dicey. Or if not, then my CC guy can run up, and with the coordinated order, I can get multiple dice. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it depends. Yeah. It's going to depend on the table and
of course,
pieces you have available. Like but the general principle is: are you applying pressure that has to be solved during their next active turn? Right? Are you creating a scenario that applies pressure? And I think that's kind of the final note here. Is that all of these questions come down to you felt something didn't go right at the end of a game of Infinity, and can you walk back to your actions where that got kicked off and try and identify it and just see what your other options were. And that's really, I think, where you start to enjoy Infinity, when you can see the puzzle. Like, I've had some of my best games of Infinity of all time, I think, when I'm really communicating well with my opponent and we're discussing the puzzle that's being laid out. As it's being laid out, I'm watching the pitchers go out in the fast pandas. I'm watching the dogs and the tigers go and hold corners. I'm watching all these little like reactive pieces get laid out during the active turn. And we're talking openly about like, well, it's getting real hard to get in the zone now. You got this and this you can do. Maybe you can try that. I don't know if you've got something hidden over here. Maybe you'll censor these guys, but this is the best I can do. This is the defense I'm setting up. And you go, and you feel that pressure all of a sudden. You feel that pressure. And then because you talk about it out loud and you agree upon it with your opponent, it's all out in the open, the pressure comes off. Because it's a known issue and you're going into it with the tools that you've, kind of like brought and that you agree upon to try and solve it. And so if it doesn't go right, if it doesn't go your way, then you try again next turn and you keep going and you just keep pushing forward, but you're not, you don't feel like you've lost agency. And I think that's where this becomes important, because every person is going to have a different and unique experience when they first start playing Infinity. And even later on, everybody still tilts. I still tilt. Owen still tilts. Dan, you're going to tilt forever at some point, even though you tell me you're not going to tilt. Everyone's going to do it. Everyone's going to have an experience that something didn't feel right.
Like, you drive up with your friend to some big event for a different location, and you make jokes about how you're going to play on the finals table all the time, and then you get there and you are going to play, and then Aguilo kills 9 people on the top of one and just ends the game immediately.
Yeah,
That was great.
it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. It happens, and that's
It was you.
I know. I'm well aware.
Dan wasn't aware.
Dan wasn't
I was-
aware. No, yeah.
nor the
I'm gonna play
audience.
top table. We got to the top table. It was the two of us on top table, and I got Guiloed hard. And that's I think that's, you can still enjoy that game when that happens. And the more you practice asking yourself those questions and trying to trace back where it didn't feel right or where it felt off or why you're frustrated, that's how you get good at being bad in Infinity. And I think that's what makes Infinity so enjoyable for me, is that you can take bad results and understanding them becomes half of enjoying the game. And I think that's a really unique experience and a unique part of Infinity, is there's almost no time where I can't walk back the game to a part I didn't enjoy that wasn't about a choice either that me or my opponent made.
Look, I
Too
just
many
got a question.
tigers.
I just got a question for you, Ash. In that game against Owen, have you tried being good at the game?
I tried getting good.
Yeah.
I did try getting good, and then
His solution, having
Tigers and Aguilo ran over my guys.
he had never played against Tigers because they hadn't actually been released yet, and I
All-
just had a bunch of shredders, and I'm
all-
like,
yeah.
here it comes.
Yeah, Owen. So the Tiger
Surprise!
profile came out, and there was a group chat with Owen, me, and Spud being like, "What in the fuck is this?" And then Owen's like, "I don't know, but I got 8 shredders that I'm cutting up right now to put on Infinity bases, and we're gonna try it out." And I was like, "Okay." And no one knew what to do with it.
It was marginally effective.
It was quite good. And for 40, they were basically the combined version of Gazis at the end of N3. They just went in every army and they ran forward and they always made back their 40 points, no matter what you did with them, for the most part. So that kind of wraps it up. I think we are in a good spot. We had a good talk about getting good at being bad at Infinity. I think being bad at Infinity, it happens every time you pick up a new faction. It happens in the beginning to everybody. It's nothing to feel bad about, and it's so unlike other miniature war games out there, where there is a linear path to victory in almost every other miniature war game that exists right now, which typically involves standing in a circle longer than anyone else.
Always
you can stand-
remember, you won because you're a better player. They won because they rolled better.
That's right. That's Owen's mental health advice for miniature war games. but it's unique because what you play for and what you play with and what you're playing against shifts in Infinity more than in almost any other miniature war game. And the linear path to victory of being able to stand longer than someone else while removing pieces at a faster rate in circles is not the path to victory. So it can be very alien coming from other popular war games to Infinity. And it's a very different, unique experience. And I think it was worth having this discussion, because I think being bad at Infinity before you're good at Infinity, or just trying to always be bad, like it's okay to just always be bad at Infinity. As long as you can ask yourself those questions and trace it back to something that you can control, you'll enjoy the game. You can never win a game of Infinity, but still enjoy the process. And I think that is a really important life skill. And I think getting good at Infinity actually makes you better at other miniature war games, because if you can be good at something that's this sort of uncompromising, then it makes the other ones easier to absorb, and more easily sort of like to emotionally manage and mentally parse. So my final note is, sorry, go on, Dan. Yes, what was that?
Yeah.
Okay,
That's all.
bye.
I just say I got some closing thoughts here. So let us know what you think about that emotional journey of starting out playing Infinity, and share some of your stories based on these questions. What are some questions we missed? You can reach out to us on Patreon, Discord, Facebook, or on Spotify, and there'll be links in the podcast description. We are at 18 out of 20 now for the Taco Awareness Tournament in January 2023. It's on the 22nd here in St. Catharines. And thanks to all the people that joined in on Patreon, and you can get access to the Patreon chat. So big thanks to Dan and Owen for talking and sharing stories today. And to you guys for listening in. And that's it. Now we can do it. Ready? Bye.
Goodbye.
Night, guys.